Asked Secretary Kerry what his next move would be. I'm not going to tell you what he said. He's joining us now. He's going to tell you himself. John Kerry, US Special Presidential Envoy for Climate. Secretary Kerry, good afternoon.
Glad to be with you.
Yeah, it's good to see you. I won't repeat that. I won't repeat that. I want to start here. This is a delicate time. You're a seasoned diplomat. We've got wars in Gaza, wars in Ukraine, and seemingly from the outside looking in, I think perhaps an inability or lack of willingness to restore order from the US perspective. Is that what's going on? Can you tell me your perspective on things? I think it's deeply valuable. Can you tell me whether you think this is an inability or a lack of will to restore global order?
Well, I'm not yet out of the job of Climate Envoy, and that's my lane, is dealing with climate. But I will tell you unequivocally that President Biden, I think, has done an extraordinary job of holding people together in the midst of a very complicated period of time, perhaps as complicated as any of us have seen, certainly in recent years. But if you look at the difficulty of sort of rebuilding NATO, which is what he had to do after the last administration, and then holding NATO together with respect to Ukraine, and simultaneously managing several other potentially explosive situations, which could lead to greater conflict, much wider conflict. And I think he's been navigating that together with Tony Blinken in an extremely effective way. These things don't change just like that overnight. And you need a ripeness to the ability to be able to negotiate something different. The negotiations in Ukraine, for instance, I suspect they could get ripe, but they're not yet. Likewise, in the Middle East, I think the administration has been crystal clear in sending messages to the Prime Minister and to his war cabinet about how they think the operations in Gaza ought to be carried out. And it's not with indiscriminate bombing and the level of deaths that we've seen now. So I think the president has been very clear here, but also, thank God, that he has the years of experience he has from the Foreign Relations Committee and as vice president, now as president.
There's a lot to unpack there. Can we just start with NATO? You mentioned NATO and rebuilding NATO. When the former president said what he had to say about NATO, he wasn't wrong. There were a lot of members who had promised to invest in defence that were falling short continuously. Has that changed?
It has changed, but it still has to be fulfilled. The promise has to be fulfilled, the 2%. And but look, again, we have a myriad of major global challenges. Let's talk about one of the biggest that doesn't get to a daily focus of Ukraine or of the Middle East, but it's killing a lot of people. The climate crisis is killing just air quality alone. We lose about 7 million people a year who die because of the bad air quality. You look at what's been happening last year, 2023, the single most disruptive year in history of measuring climate impacts. Fires, floods, massive rainstorms, greater intensity to storms, the heat, which people can't live in, massive numbers of refugees already, and that could grow worse as it gets warmer, which it is going to, because we're not moving fast enough to curb the impacts of unmitigated burning of fossil fuel. So there's only one cause of this crisis. It's the unmitigated burning of fossil fuel. And we in Dubai, 195 nations strong, including oil and gas producing countries, including ours, all signed up to transition away from fossil fuel, to do so in keeping with the science, which means trying to hold 1.5. That's a pretty rigorous standard. To do so, keeping 2050 net zero, and finally, to accelerate our efforts in this decade. That's a pretty big mandate, folks.
At the same time, the U.S. is pumping more than 13 million barrels of oil per day. It is a record amount. It has been credited for offsetting some of the geopolitical risk. Do you think that that's a policy failure or a policy success?
It's a policy necessity, because you obviously can't shut down the economies of the world and be ridiculous in sort of saying, oh, okay, we don't, you know, you're going to affect demand without affecting supply at the same time. You've got to have a broad approach. That's what the administration is trying to do. For the moment, you have to try to keep the economy stable and keep the price low enough that you don't have revolutions in countries all around the world because the gas prices are $10 a gallon, whatever it's going to be. So you've got to have some reasonableness. But that has to be accompanied by a very clear set of policies that are moving in the direction of this transition away from fossil fuel, that are therefore deploying renewables faster, that are putting new technologies out there in order to mitigate. If we don't do that, then it is a mistake and it contributes to the problem.
But a lot of people...
But I think we're going to do that, and I think we're doing that already right now in many parts of the world.
A lot of people talk about what the future is. Joe Biden's talked a lot about electric vehicles, but we've seen a lot of companies pull back from electric vehicle production because there isn't the demand. Do you get the sense that there is a successful, coherent policy that has been prescribed by Joe Biden to achieve what you're talking about while also pumping record amounts of oil?
Yes, there has been a very, very clear policy, which regrettably has been attacked by people who are engaged in high levels of disinformation. They've been trying to scare people about the range of vehicles, so there's range anxiety out there. But in addition to that, you've had some pullback because communities aren't moving fast enough to give permitting to deploy some of the renewables that we need. So you've had wind farms that were going to be built that have now taken years longer than was calculated in making the deals, and people have had to recalculate now how that deal's going to work. So the answer is we have to, all of us, embrace this transition. If we're going to take 5 and 10 years and have years of litigation over whether or not you're going to have a renewable plant somewhere nearby, we're in trouble. We're not going to get there. And we have to accelerate that, and that's a lot of the message right here in Davos.
Just to jump in, it's difficult for me to believe that the poor EV sales are a consequence of a misinformation campaign about range anxiety. Let's take Hertz. Not my view of the car rental company. They come out and they've got to dump 20,000 EV cars. They don't just talk about rebalancing supply with demand. They talk about the cost to carry. It's really expensive to keep these vehicles.
Sure.
It's really expensive to go and buy one. I think what we're seeing is a reality check, not just about the ultimate destination, but the pace at which we get there. A reality check because for most everyday Americans, they can't afford this.
Let me tell you what's happening. The price is going down as the price of renewables has gone down. The price of renewable solar has gone down 83% in the last years. The price of wind has gone down 50% in the last years. The price of lithium has gone down something like 97% in the last years. And we do need to send stronger demand signals to the marketplace. Now, we have an entity here that we've created a number of years ago called the First Movers Coalition. We have 100 of the top corporations of the world in this First Movers Coalition. That includes Apple, Microsoft, Salesforce, Boeing, FedEx, Ford, General Motors, a whole bunch of major American and other international companies. And they have agreed they're going to pay a green premium voluntarily in order to send a market signal to have green steel created now. Volvo has said, we'll buy 10% of our steel that's going to be green. So they're making green steel. Cement is now on sale in Lafarge Holcim, largest cement dealer in the world. They're making green cement. And it's better cement. People are buying it not because it's green, because it is better. So we're seeing a movement towards a rational transition with those biggest companies. And I'll tell you, if the CEOs of those companies can persuade their boards and their shareholders that this is a valuable enterprise, then more people are going to buy into this over a period of time. This is a transition. It doesn't have to happen overnight. There will be ups and downs. There will be bumps in the road. But I'm telling you, EVs now, there's a sufficient level of penetration, about 92% in Norway. Major levels in China. The front page of The Economist has a big picture of, electric vehicles from China coming in towards the United States. And those are selling for something like $22,500. And it's going to become a bone of contention. You watch. We'll have some discussions about that. But the point I make is this will even out over time. General Motors and Ford and Mercedes and Volkswagen and Hyundai and Toyota, these companies have all spent billions of dollars retooling their plants. I'm telling you, I don't care. It doesn't matter who comes in. Whoever the president of the United States is or a public official is, those CEOs are not going to suddenly go back and say, oh, let's go back and we'll make...
Of course not. They're ready on a plan. But can we talk about the materials to make an electric vehicle and the negative externalities of these? These raw materials are in Africa, and then they're processed 85% in China. We're talking about serious manufacturing issues, labor issues, human rights issues. How do you weigh that against carbon emissions?
Well, we always, President Biden, I think, more than any president in recent time, has been fighting for the rights of workers, and he is constantly, as you know, referring to unions and union workers and defending the rights of workers to be able to do better. So, but those materials you refer to, sure, that we're going to go through a transition. There's a lot of lithium in Mexico, by the way. Cobalt, nickel, these are the things we need. They're not all in Africa. And now the National Security Council of the United States, under President Biden's direction, has focused in on these critical minerals. And I think you're going to see the balance of where they come from and who has them change, mostly because of market forces. The marketplace is going to support this transition. And I think it's irrevocable now. There's no question about whether or not the world is going to get to a low-carbon, no-carbon economy. We're going to get there. The only question is, are we going to get there in time to not be ravaged by the worst consequences of the climate crisis? And that's not me talking. That's the best scientists in the world who have warned us. You've got to do these things now, or it's going to cost you more down the road.
Let's end on President Biden. There's reporting that you're stepping down to actually go work for the campaign to get out the climate vote, the youth vote. How successful do you think you can be in that position when the youth think that this is a president that is too old and too out of touch to lead them, especially also when it comes to a foreign policy issue like Gaza?
Very fair, and it's a great question. But let me begin it by saying I'm not stepping down in order to go to the campaign. I'm stepping down because I think that what we've done in terms of Dubai is so powerful in terms of encouraging this transition that it's going to open up a whole new set of opportunities which are important. And mind you, I came for a year. I've been there for 3. I think it's time. I will campaign for President Biden. I will certainly, because the stakes could not be higher for our country, for the world. The stakes are as high as they get, and as high as I've seen in the course of my public service. So I am going to campaign very happily because I think he's done a terrific job. He's shown experience. He's kept us from, having a complete breakout of uncontrolled war in many regions. But at the same time, he stood up for American values, global values, universal values, for America's obligations with respect to Ukraine, the Middle East, and elsewhere. And if you've listened to Secretary Blinken and the President in the last days, they've been crystal clear about expectations for what needs to unfold in the West Bank, in Gaza. And I think young people around the world will see an administration fighting for the rights of people to get the medicine they need to have, to be safe, and for the Palestinian people to have a future, even as Israel is absolutely protected as it needs to be.
Secretary Kerry, we appreciate the robust exchange. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Was that robust? Is that what you call it?